Everything looks better with a dram in your hand.
Hello, welcome back to episode 13. Now, as Kermit the Frog once sang, "It's not easy being green." And like the songs of many wise amphibians, his carried wisdom in advance of its time. The true significance of those words wasn't fully comprehended, at least at first. Now, 50 years on, we're finally catching up to Kermit in our understanding of exactly how challenging being green really can be. Sustainability, eco-friendly practices, and minimising footprints, well, these are all areas of key concern for modern businesses. The whisky industry itself may be centuries old, but it's always been prepared to move and innovate with the times, and that may well be one of the reasons it's endured for so long, so well. And I'll be visiting one of those enduring distilleries that really has put keeping up to date as one of its key priorities, the venerable Glengoyne. And I'll be visiting to find out not just how they make their whisky, but also how the distillery is becoming embedded in its local landscape, a sustainable feature. Before that though, let me whisk you away to the scenic hills of Perthshire and introduce you to a project that we at Cask-88 are very proud to be getting involved with. The project itself involves our absolute favourite subject, casks, and the oak wood that goes into producing them. Come with me now on a journey through time and space. Yeah.
Oak trees are incredibly important to Scottish whisky. In fact, anything that dares to call itself a Scotch could not have spent any fewer than 3 years maturing in a cask made of oak. But you're almost never going to find a cask of whisky that was matured in Scottish oak, because there simply aren't enough Scottish oak trees. Now, those romantic images you have of Scotland, those wind-blasted hills, well, they're not supposed to look like that. They've slowly been deforested over the centuries. But there are people who want to bring the trees back. They're green, they eat carbon, and they smell nice. And we in the whisky industry are also keen to see a few more oak trees around the place because, well, one day we have a dream, maybe in the far future, that Scottish coopers could once again work with their native wood. Now I'm here in Chowlach Wood to talk with Angus Crabby of Trees4Scotland. And we're hoping that together we could kickstart a project in which our cask sales and their tree planting efforts could take a good chunk of Scotland and return it to the forested state it should always have been in. Gus, thank you for joining me at what is still a very safe social distance.
Yep, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, so tell me, why is Scotland so short on trees?
It's a very good question. Scotland's one of these countries in the world that has quite mild winters. We all know it's pretty wet in this country. The climate's absolutely ideal for growing trees, yet large swathes of the country are treeless. That wasn't always the case. As society developed, and especially rural society, a lot of sheep and cattle appeared on the hills, and as they appeared, the trees slowly started to disappear. And it's only until I suppose recent decades, we've realised the true value of trees to the world, and they've started, drives like our own. It's also started to raise awareness that more trees need to be put back and the land restored to the way it should be and the way it should look.
So we're sitting here now in Chowlach Wood, which is a project you started 10 years ago. So could you tell us a bit more about some of the projects, the replanting projects that Trees4Scotland are involved in?
Well, Chowlach Wood's it's a great place to be sitting just now because it provides a living, working example of what we're actually trying to achieve when we're replanting woodlands. This woodland, Chowlach Wood, the word itself is Scots Gaelic and it means family or clan. Particularly appropriate for this woodland as we couldn't do it alone. So businesses, organisations like your own, as well as many individuals from all over the world, have got involved with helping us fund and plant trees and also look after the growing of trees within this woodland. We aim for 3 key things as part of our organisation, which is really one of them's community. So we want our woodlands to be opened up to the community. Wildlife's incredibly important to us, hence the biodiversity element of planting mainly deciduous trees within our woodlands, native Scots varieties, as well as a few, looking around, there's a few Scots pines as well dotted about some of the hillsides. And tackling climate change and environmental worries are also at the forefront of what we're doing here.
And so Chellichwood here is about 10 years into growing. So if we think in whisky terms, that's a pretty mature whisky. But where we're going to be helping out is a plot of land that's really just been cleared for a new reforesting. Will you tell us a little more about the Old Millwood?
Well, Old Millwood was largely monoculture spruce, very wet. It was in an area that was originally the site of an old mill pond. So once that was clear felled, the trees were about 44 years old, or there or thereabouts. That timber was all clear felled. We're now clearing the area and going to transform that area into something similar to Chowlichwood. So there'll be deciduous trees getting planted. We've restored the old mill pond, so the large wet area has been dug out, and we've actually restored it to a living and flowing pond, which in itself is already attracting a lot of wildlife back to the area. And once the trees and the deciduous trees are planted up around it, many of them being oak, which is of particular interest to you guys, it will again. When we go and see Old Millwood, what you'll see is a real contrast. It's great seeing this, because this is largely what we're aiming at with Old Millwood, although a real focus on wildlife habitats.
Yeah, it's going to be nice. We're going to be able to see side by side the kind of what Old Millwood looks like now, and then we'll see this Chowlichwood, which is kind of an example of what it might look like in the future once it's been left to mature for a bit. But as you said, our real focus is on oak. It has a lot of meaning for the whisky industry as a tree, but it's not a great idea to just plant a monoculture of oak trees. It's a good idea to have different species supporting each other. But within that, what is kind of the oak's role within a woodland?
I mean, you're absolutely right, Sam, to say that we don't want to just plant oak trees. Otherwise, that wouldn't be a woodland. It would be a plantation of oak trees. Oak trees, some of which you can see behind me and throughout our walks through Chowlichwood, they're interspersed. They're forming very much a key part of the the biodiversity and the tree, one of the key tree varieties that we plant. But oak trees themselves are of particular value because they're slow growing. They are the historians of our woodlands, and if they could talk, they would have many stories to tell, I'm sure.
Yeah, and how long roughly would it take for, well, let's say a single oak tree to reach maturity, and how long would it take for, say, this whole woodland to be at a point that you could call it mature woodland?
Well, different tree varieties grow at different speeds. Oak trees live a very, very long time, some up to 600 years. So when you see mature oak trees, they are really quite special and should be protected, and many of them are protected. Within this woodland here, where we have lots of oak trees, we've got birch, we've got hazel, we've got hawthorn, we've got holly, we've got a whole variety of different woodland species in here. A birch tree, for example, will be mature in about 80 years, whereas an oak tree is still maturing at that age and long after, into the hundreds of years. So a mature woodland, we tend to look at, say, 100 years for a woodland like this to say, right, this is fully mature. But the oak trees themselves will last many, many years after the likes of the birch.
Yeah, we have to be really sort of forward thinking on this, I guess. So a lot of the oak that we use in the whisky industry is American oak. It's Quercus alba, and that has about 100 years to maturity. But the trees that would be planted in Scotland, the oaks, are a different species, Quercus robur, and as you say, hundreds of years, and I don't think you could get good wood out of them for at least 150. We're not looking to start harvesting any time in the near future. We want the woodlands to recover, but could you see a time where Scottish oak is back on the menu for maybe making whisky casks?
If you take an oak tree, it's such a good question, because when you take an oak tree and that's mature, you might see it in a park or you might see it in a woodland area, and you look around, you don't see its successor very often. Where are the young oak trees that will become the mature oak in many, many years' time? And woodlands and parks and all these sorts of areas should be thinking about, succession planning for the mature trees, because they don't last forever. But the likes of an oak does take a very, very long time to mature and grow, and hence is a precious wood. Would they ever be used for whisky casks? Well, let's hope that the whisky industry is still thriving the way it is just now in many hundreds of years' time. And if that's the case, then, well, why not? If there's enough oak available, why not?
Yeah, just start planning now, and careful husbandry projects like this, maybe. But you say that you don't usually see the successor of an oak. Now, oaks are still producing acorns all over the place, but I guess growing a tree isn't as simple as just getting the seed and plopping it in the ground. You do a lot more work than that.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me about tree planting all the time, and you do a lot of tree planting. Yes, we do a lot of tree planting. But
there's evidence for that all around.
Yeah, well, I prefer to call it tree growing, because you're right, Sam, planting is just one part of a process, and that process starts long before you actually put a tree in the ground. So with the likes of Chowlach Wood here, the hillside was largely covered in bracken, so the bracken needs to be treated before you go and put the small trees in. There's a big population of roe deer and red deer in this area, so we need to deer fence and deer proof the area before the young trees are planted. We put little protectors on the trees. We do mounding. We make sure there's upturned earth that the trees are planted into, so that they're not going to get choked by weeds when they're very, very young. And then there's ongoing maintenance of the woodland thereafter. There's beat-ups and weeding and all these sorts of things that have to take place in order for the woodland to be successful. So it's a very important part of the process, the planting. And yes, it is as simple as putting a seed in the ground and the tree will grow. But if you want a successful woodland for many, many years to come, then you need to manage those woodlands. It's not just about chucking a tree in the ground and hoping for the best.
And that's how we at Cask-88 are hoping to help. We sell casks of whisky, that's one of the things we do. They're made of oak, and it might be nice that, for the casks we sell, if some of that money comes here, there's almost a sort of nice cycle in that sort of the trees that have been used can contribute to new trees coming forward. For other folks who might want to get involved with some planting here, what are ways that people can interact with your planting projects?
What you guys have done at Cask-88 by getting involved is a really good example of what we're looking for Old Millwood. So we're looking for organisations and businesses and individuals even to help support and fund the planting and maintenance of that woodland. And if that can happen in a way similar to what we're working with you guys, then brilliant. There's also obviously individuals can get involved and contribute to the woodland through our website as well at Trees4Scotland.com. So there's always ways for people to get involved, and we're always open to introductions to other potential suitors and supporters.
And we'll put links and appropriate stuff in down below. Yeah, Gus, it's been a real pleasure sort of sitting here actually at the heart of the woodland that you've brought out of the ground with your own bare hands, and it'd be lovely to sort of check back and see how the trees are growing and progressing, and one day come back and see whether there's some oak trees that might be ready for the whisky industry as well.
So it's great to have you here and to see what we're doing. We're really proud of what we've done here, and it's one of those things where every year you come back, you see the trees have grown a little bit more, and as you guys come back and see Old Mill Wood and see how that's developing from ground zero, essentially, from a clear fell site into what hopefully will be something similar to this nice woodland, you'll hopefully be suitably impressed and proud of your involvement in the project.
It's going to be beautiful. Angus Crabby, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sam. Cheers.
Okay, on to the distillery, I think. Right, well, I'm standing now on the Highland Line. I'm now standing next to the Highland Line, the line that divides the Highlands and the Lowlands of Scotland. Now, up that way, it really is whiskey-making country. About 80% of Scotland's people live there, in the Lowlands, but about 80% of Scotland's distilleries live there, in the Highlands. I think it's a ratio of about 10 distilleries to every person that way. Now, if ever there was a distillery that played diplomat, ambassador between the two regions, it would be here. It's a distillery that makes its whiskey north of the Highland Line and then ships it over the road to the warehouses in the Lowlands. And the name of that distillery, I'll give you a second whiskey nuts to figure that one out, is Glengoyne. Glengoyne has been here for an awfully long time, and they make a famously light, fruity and beautifully drinkable whiskey. But as we're heading forward into the future, well, we're seeing a few more considerations that distilleries might want to take into account on going a little greener, a little more eco, and Glengoyne is known very well for taking such measures into their own hands. So come with me now as I investigate Glengoyne, learn a bit more about how they make their whiskey, and also how they're trying to make it fit in a little more with the local environment. Well, I'm delighted to be here, sitting in front of the grand dam of Glengoyne Distillery, the water coming straight down from the hills to cool the equipment here, with Gordon Dallas of Glengoyne. Thank you so much for having us here.
Hello Sam, I'm delighted to be here and welcome to Glengoyne.
So this is quite a nice, clean, modern room, but Glengoyne has been around since 1833. It's one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland. And so you've been doing stuff here for almost 200 years. What lessons have you learned in that time?
You said after 1833, because if you said before 1833, the big lesson was don't get caught. Once legalisation occurred, you could mature your whisky. And that's really been, I think, the watchword for Glengoyne is the maturation of whisky. The farmer started this off, 1833, George Connell. He would have known a little bit about maturation, but a slow, sure ascent to where we are now with our sherry cask maturation. So I think it was the using the wood that really kicked in the Victorian era, and that slow distillation we're well known for. So those two pillars, I think, really drive Glengoyne from what was a rough raw spirit up in the hills over 200 years ago to what's in these bottles today.
That's, so general kind of taking your time with things, do it slowly, which I think really, the whiskey really does benefit a lot from. You mentioned casks there. Cask-88, we love our casks, and Glengoyne, you're famous for your choice of sherry casks, but there's more to it than just choosing sherry casks. So what is your kind of wood program here?
Really, it's to source the finest casks that are humanly possible to get. And we are a family company, and we have looked to families in the south of Spain, into, of course, as you know, the Jerez region. And really, it's just to source the best casks we can possibly do, and that comes in the form of the Tavasa cooperage down in Jerez. We work with them, and the Humberto Domecq cooperage as well as Vastima.
And it's paid off. You know, Glengoyne's spirit feels like it's quite friendly and fruity and gentle, but the sherry brings just an extra backup punch to it. Is there a balance between European oak sherry and American oak matured sherry?
Yes, there certainly is, and certain expressions will have a combination of two, and the 21 will have just the European oak sherry cask. And these forests now, they're not growing really. You know, the forests in America with the white oak, they're a bit more plentiful, but the forests in the north of Spain, south of France, they are precious, they are rare, and those casks you get from these lovely timbers, sustainably felled. It's an amazing flavour and taste. So really, our master blender will combine both sets of those sherry casks together to make the expressions you see before us.
One thing that's quite unique about Glengoyne is you're a Highland distillery, but only just. The distillation happens north of the Highland Line, and then the maturation of the casks is just over the road in the Lowlands. So what kind of whiskey are you?
Right on the line, you're absolutely right enough. So the warehousemen were all Lowlanders, and the stillmen were all Highlanders. In the old days, they had to build a wall about 12 feet high to keep them apart. No, so you're absolutely enough. We're right on the line, and of course, in 1784, when that line was drawn up, it wasn't to do with flavours, it was to do with tax, it was to do with money. So the Glengoyne characteristic really has always been about non-peated. Never been peated. There's no peat around here. There never has been peat, so we've never smoked the barley. So that's your first style, a non-smoky whisky. And I suppose, is it difficult, or should I say, is it easy to generalise regions now? Lowlands and Highlands, it's very difficult, but we certainly make that lovely, fruity, sweet flavoured whisky here at Glengoyne, and we have done for a number of years.
So whisky making generally it feels, and I think one reason people like it so much, it feels like a very old, established, traditional art that hasn't changed in centuries. Which also means that perhaps now that we're looking to a greener future, there may be a few sort of challenges there. So how true is it that whisky hasn't changed, and what kind of difficulties has whisky maybe had in being a bit eco?
Yes, a very good question there, Sam. You have to go back, really, that famous quote about Brother John Corr and Lindores Abbey, 1494. Was he doing it the same way we're doing it? Not far off, I wouldn't think. Not really far off. And for sustainability, you're looking at really the power to heat your stills up for that sustainability angle, and also your waste products. Your pot ales, your spent lees and your draughts. I suspect in the old days, it was going back to the land to feed the animals, but there was still going to be some materials you couldn't get rid of that easily or environmentally. So yes, maybe not as hard as when you're distilling crude oil. There's some terrible byproducts. When you're distilling basically a beer, you get byproducts, but they're not horrific to the environment as it would be if you were doing crude oil. So they've been there, and we are getting much better at seeing what we can do for the waste as an industry.
So already whisky is, I guess it is a sort of fairly organic process, so it's doing okay environmentally, but that's not enough for Glengoyne. You're known as being one of the most eco-conscious distilleries, and you've made quite a few changes to the way you do things around here to sort of fit in with environmental kindness. Could you take me through a few of those?
Absolutely. Well, let's just say we're coming up to the first year now. So that was autumn 2019. All our electricity that powers where we are sitting today comes from wind energy, 100%.
Nice.
So that is that's number one. Number two, we could take you back to 2010, where Ian MacLeod invested rather heavily in a wetland project. Before 2010, the spent lees and the pot ale were mixed together and sold to the farmer, who spread them on the field, as many of you know, and the draft was sent to the cattle feed. The pot ale and the spent lees mixed together wasn't good. The spent lees would dilute the power of the fertilisation of the pot ale. So it wasn't quite as good as it could be. So 2010, we split the spent lees from the pot ale, brought in a new pot ale tank. So the pot ale sat individually, and the spent lees would now be pumped with a 1.5 kilowatt pump across the road to a new wetland project that we had designed with 12 cells, 13,500 plants, 15 different species. And every species of plant has its own job to do, like lower the copper content, reduce the ammonia, the phosphorus, and amazing, increase the oxygen in the liquids. And after 3 days, you can take that spent lees, and at the end of the last cell, you open it up and the clean water trickles into the River Hendrick and away to Loch Lomond.
See, that seems amazing to me. You've mentioned things there that ought to be quite challenging, copper, metals. Spent lees has a reputation for being a really difficult substance, but 3 days among thousands of plants, it manages to kind of detoxify it and turn it back into potable water.
It's amazing, really. It's a wonder when the answer to a lot of these environmental questions is out there. It's in nature, it's in plants, the power of plants.
And as you said, it's a natural wonder. It's something that people would like to visit. It's a wetland, provides a home for, geese among many things. And of course, Glengoyne is the valley of the geese, so you're kind of bringing a home for your spirit animal.
We absolutely love the geese. It's almost overnight, it was 25% less waste, which approximates about 21 tankers less per week.
Wow.
Coming in and coming out, taking the effluent away. So even there you can see the benefit from day one.
It's wonderful. And there's still another thing now, between us here has been kind of familiar, but to folks who've been drinking Glengoyne for a long time, this packaging might not be instantly recognisable. So this is the new range of Glengoyne packaging, redesigned,
Yes.
but also made of different materials.
Recyclable materials. So it's made of recyclable materials, and it is 100% recyclable, which is wonderful, and locally sourced. We've not been sending overseas, so it's locally sourced materials, and you can recycle the entire core range of, in fact, the entire range of Glengoyne. Just to show you, this was the old, you may be familiar with that, and it's lovely but packaging, but of course on the end you've got your metal.
Yeah,
and some of the older ranges, the 21s, there was a magnets in there to close doors. So the magnets are not recyclable, but this is a fully recyclable cardboard range. So packaging, and I think in the industry you'll see that more and more, Sam. People will be looking at their packaging and seeing how they can do what we've done, trying to make it more friendly to the environment.
It feels like the more distilleries get interested in using packaging like this, the more economical it's going to become. It's great that it's local. Let's keep looking further forward. What's in Glengoyne's future? Be it whiskey, eco projects, or people being able to come and visit the distillery when things have blown over.
Yes, well, we still want people to do that, of course. I would like people to come, and I suppose that would be one of the areas, is to try and visit us in a more environmentally friendly mode of transport. You know, we have a wonderful bus service that takes people from the city of Glasgow down there. We sometimes refer to it lovingly as the party bus. Once people have visited us here, they get put back on the bus and head back into Glasgow, and they maybe haven't known each other beforehand, but they certainly do on the top deck of the number 10, heading back to Glasgow. So that'll be one way of trying to get our visitors round and being a more environmentally, way of doing things.
I would thoroughly recommend coming to visit Glengoyne. It's quite accessible from the two main cities of Scotland, just on the Highland Line itself, but it's set in the most beautiful scenery. This is if you want to sort of experience what Scotland looks like in the travel brochures, I think Glengoyne is pretty much set into one of those.
Once you walk into it, you forget the roads behind you, and it just goes further back to what you're seeing here, into the hidden valley. And this was a hidden valley way back in the smuggling days, in the early parts of the 19th century. And now it goes into the up to the waterfall, that people can take a stroll up there and toast the whiskey gods with a little dram.
And no, it's functional water as well,
As
which
you might
comes
want
down
to
to
do
equipment.
yourself.
But yeah, so I mean, after talking about it for so long, it does feel like we need to do justice to the whiskey itself. Thank you very much.
Slàinte mhath.
Slàinte mhath. Oh, Glengoyne.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, it really is.
Now let's go for a swim. Come on.
That was quite refreshing, all in all. The best thing really about talking to folk about ecological concerns is that I get to spend quite a lot of time outdoors, and the Scottish rain is naturally quite a big part of that. Somehow though, I feel the call of the wild more than ever these days. Thank you once again to Angus Crabby and Trees4Scotland for putting more trees into Scotland. We look forward to seeing the Old Mill wood grow towards maturity in the same way that fine whisky does. And we're delighted that some of our cask sales at Cask-88 can contribute towards putting a few more of those vital oak trees into Scotland as well. Thank you also to Gordon and everyone at Glengoyne Distillery, a truly lovely place no matter the weather. May the geese always find haven with you. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this new look for the Cask-88 lock-in, and we'll see you again in a month.
Hey, you! Get away from my trees.